Here's another common objection. Father, do you mean to say that people, when they get married, the real reason they're all getting married is so they can have children? Let's be frank, Father. Most people get married for love. They don't get married for children. They might get married for children, but even if they did want children, they wouldn't marry someone they didn't love. So really, marriage is about love, right? So you say to yourself, how is it then that the purpose of marriage isn't love rather than the generation of children? Well, to answer that objection, you make another fairly elementary distinction. If I told you that most people who studied medicine to become doctors, most of them did it because they wanted to be rich, you might say, that's a possibility. Might be the case. Does that mean getting rich is a purpose of medicine? Absolutely not. We make a distinction between someone's motive and the intrinsic purpose of what they're doing. And it's the same with marriage. With marriage, the motive that many people have, perhaps most people, is love. But the intrinsic purpose of what they're doing is a generation and the education of children. Loving someone doesn't make you married. You can say, I love you with all my heart. Guess what? You're not married. Jonathan and David in the scriptures made a promise to love each other for the rest of their lives. Didn't make them married. Living together doesn't make you married. Even raising children together doesn't make you married. Let's say that a brother and a sister were raising the children of their deceased sibling together. They're not married. What makes you married, again, is that you give to one another the exclusive right over one another's bodies for the acts apt to generate children. And if you're going to do that, you better love the person you marry. You better live with them. You better raise your children together. All of those things follow from that initial promise that's essential to the marriage bond. So marriage in itself, its intrinsic purpose, is a generation of children. And that doesn't preclude or prevent us from marrying out of the motive of love. You see the difference there? So it's perfectly consistent to say marriage is for the sake of a generation, the education of children, and to say most people, and perfectly validly and legitimately, get married for the motive of love. I would add, however, that your motive of love should not exclude the intrinsic purpose of the marriage. You'll do a lot better. A young man will do a lot better being a doctor if his motive also includes the idea of healing people, right? If his only motive is to make money, he'll be a terrible doctor. If your only motive in getting married is love, you're not going to be great parents and great husband and wife, to be honest. So, those are a few responses to those objections. Marriage is for the sake of the generation and the education of children. What about marriage being lifelong? I think most people think that's an ideal we should strive for. But there are many objections that seem to be reasonable objections to that. What if one of the spouses is abusive? Let's say you've got a man and a woman, they've married, and the husband becomes physically very abusive towards his wife. Are you telling me, Father, they have to stay together and she just has to let him beat up on her all day? And that's okay? No, not at all. They can physically separate. In fact, they probably should for the safety of the wife and perhaps any children that are in the marriage. But living separately doesn't make you unmarried. If you live separately, even though you can separate because of abuse, you're still not free to get married to someone else. And that's the key point. You can't give to someone else the right over your body for the acts that are apt to generate children once you've given that right to some person who's still alive. Now you might say that's unfair. Well, let me give you a simple example. Let me give the example of someone who has a toothache. And because they have a toothache, it's painful to eat. Now, if you were a doctor or a dentist, would you recommend to them, okay, the solution is stop eating? Would that be the correct solution? No, because eating is perfective of human nature. It's not the problem. The problem is a bad tooth, and that's what needs to be addressed. In the same way, a priest who tells a couple where there's abuse, you should stop being married, is giving bad advice. The problem isn't that they're married. Marriage is perfective of human nature. The problem is a lack of virtue in one or both of the spouses. Marriage isn't the problem, so divorce is never the solution. The solution is to work on your own problems, and each person has to try and work on their own lack of virtue, hopefully until the marriage can be healed. Sometimes it never does get healed. Sometimes people have enough or serious enough problems that that's not doable. But what is doable is that you can still remain faithful to your spouse and not try to marry someone else. And that's what's required. When we make that commitment, we say that marriage is lifelong, that's what we mean. Even if a spouse becomes abusive, while that's a perfectly good reason to separate from them, it's not a reason to remarry. Marriage is still lifelong, and fidelity is expected. Well, that raises another objection. What if someone, through no fault of their own, who has been an excellent spouse, is abandoned by their spouse? Just completely unjustly. Their spouse just gets up and leaves them. Is it okay in a case like that for that abandoned spouse to find comfort in another spouse, in another husband, and another wife? It seems unfair for that abandoned spouse to be left in the situation where they can never have the comfort of a spouse. And they didn't do anything wrong. Well, the response to that objection is, your marriage vows did not begin with the word if. When you get married, you don't say, if you love me and honor me, then I will love and honor you all the days of your life till death do us part. The word if does not come into your marriage vows. You make your marriage vows unilaterally. You make them unconditionally. Your obligation when you get married has nothing to do with whether or not your spouse fulfills their obligation. Each of you is making an unconditional and unilateral promise, even if your spouse abandons you through no fault of your own. And it's important, indeed it's essential, that that's how marriage vows be. What would the world be like if every marriage vow began with the word if? There wouldn't be very many married couples in this church today, I guarantee you that. How easy it is to find exceptions and reasons to get out. No, it's good for children, and it's good for us. It's good for those who are married. When you stand there at the altar and your husband says to you, I will love you and honor you all the days of your life till death do us part, period. Without any ifs. That is a tremendous risk and therefore a tremendous source of joy and love. And when the bride says in response, I take you to be my husband, I will love you and honor you all the days of your life till death do us part. No ifs. That's how human love should be. That's how marriage should be. And it means we have to be faithful even if our spouse is not. And it's better for us. It's better for us. So marriage really is lifelong. And in spite of the modern world's lack of hope that true love can really exist between husband and wife, the church keeps on proclaiming clearly, unambiguously, marriage is for life. Marriage is for life.